All right. Thanks very much, everybody, for coming back for our final session of IDRA's Spring Conference for 2024. It's been a great conference, and I'm very excited about all the presentations that we've had, including this one. For those just joining for this session, which there might be folks who are just joining us, I'll briefly explain IDRA, who I am, what IDRA is, and what this conference is all about. So I am Stephen Goldmeyer. I am the Justice Systems Manager at the Galt Center, which I don't think I said in the last session, but I am here today in my capacity as the IDRA Board President. IDRA, the Indigent Defense Research Association, is a multidisciplinary virtual community of people who do public defense, who do research into public defense, and even people who fund that research, fund public defense, or all sorts of different roles that people find themselves who have a stake and interest in seeing the research around how public defense is delivered, seeing that research improved for the sake of improving the delivery of public defense. So we're very excited, again, as always, to have a very diverse group of folks from a lot of different disciplines and a lot of different areas of the country and sometimes the world. We have, international board members even. So we're very excited always to have such a diverse group of people, and I'm excited about today's presentation. So with that, I will hand it over to our presenters for this session.
Thanks, Stephen. Hi, all. Thanks for coming back for the last session of the conference. It's a little more informal today, so we're excited to talk a little bit about the partnership that was undertaken between the Los Angeles County Public Defender's Office and an organization called Measures for Justice. We're a nonpartisan nonprofit focused on justice system data transparency and improvement. So I'm Sema Taheri. I'm going to be your moderator. And we have two really great panelists who I'll introduce in a moment, but I do just want to set the stage a little bit. So in 2021, MFJ and LACPD worked together to gather some data that would help explore the impact of the $0 bail policy imposed during 2020, if we all remember 2020 in California, and its relationship to client outcomes. So our goal today is just to recap all of the results, though we'll do a little bit of that for level setting. But we do want to have a conversation with all of you about some of those lessons that we learned, but also the covering both what the office is doing using those data findings moving forward, but also some of the data challenges that were identified and how that might factor into decision-making long-term, and then have a discussion around that moving forward. So like I said, we'll set the stage a little bit on how that partnership came to be, what it was like to collect some of that data, give a quick summary of those findings so that everybody knows what we're talking about, and some of the qualitative data. And then I'll invite discussants to share their challenges in these efforts and then open the discussion to all of you. So we encourage everyone to raise their hand or participate in this chat, however you'd like and feel most comfortable participating, but please do participate. So if you attended the last session with Jonah and Teresa, you'll be ramped up for this discussion. I got very excited listening to what they were sharing about data and data infrastructure. But if not, hopefully our panelists will be able to spark some more ideas for you. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Mason DeLang, who is a senior data science manager at MFJ. Mason's work involves assisting with the development of MFJ's methodology and conducting statistical analyses for projects like this and other research. Mason earned his PhD in political science from the University of Rochester and holds a master's degree in economics from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, which I'm in Wisconsin now. So Mason has a focus on mechanisms underlying the spread of information online as part of his research interests, but really is overall a great contribution to the organization here. And Natasha Khamashta, Director of Strategic Growth and Development with the Los Angeles County Public Defender's Office. Natasha began her career with LACPD over 23 years ago and has served in various capacities, the first decade as a trial attorney and the second as a deputy in charge in both adult and juvenile divisions. So Natasha currently works with the Grants Unit and Training Division. I encourage you all to talk with her about the different grants that she has obtained for the office. And this is her 7th year co-organizing the Youth Defender and Advocate Training Seminar. So welcome to both Mason and Natasha. So, Natasha, I'm wondering if you can start us off to talk a little bit about how this partnership between MFJ and LACPD came to be and why the office was interested in working with someone to answer these questions off that.
Yes, of course. Good afternoon and good morning. We're crossing time spans here today. Thank you so much for having me. And so back in 2020, when March, the court systems shut down here around March 13th of 2020. And immediately, within about a week, I received a phone call from one of our division chiefs, and she really wanted to explore how we can capture the data with the zero bail policies that were being implemented. And so I immediately called my friend Michaela Rabinowitz, who is also a PhD researcher, and she used to work for Measures for Justice. And I had that relationship with her because we had done previous research when she was with Resource Development Association. So our office has been wanting to collaborate with researchers, and Michaela and her team, she immediately reached out to the founder, Amy Bach of Measures for Justice, and then our collaboration started. It was a quick interest, and then MFJ was very interested, and it was so timely, of course, and the sooner that we started the discussion, the more robust dialogue that we could have.
That's great. And a lot of that requires collecting data, which LACPD has done a lot of, as you mentioned, in the past and also around all of the questions that you have, but it poses a number of other challenges. So I'm wondering, Mason, if you can maybe outline a little bit about the questions we asked and then the data we tried to collect in order to answer those questions.
Sure, I can do that. So to backtrack just a little bit, the analysis that we really did focused very much on this $0 bail policy that was implemented across Los Angeles on March 26th, 2020. And that policy really opened the door for an analysis that looked at the impact of bail on case outcomes. The three outcomes that we were interested in were one, whether or not a defendant missed an appearance during their case, two, whether or not a case ended in conviction, and then three, whether or not a defendant had new charges filed during their case. So that would be new charges filed after their release, but before the disposition of that initial case. And so we wanted to know whether or not these outcomes differed for people who were impacted by the bail system in that pre-policy period compared to people who were released on their own recognizance as part of the emergency policy. And so what we did is we focused on a narrow window around the emergency policy and essentially looked at differences in outcomes before and after that policy was implemented. So in terms of data, because this was a multivariate analysis, it was really important to collect information on client and case characteristics. And so we got a bunch of data from LACPD as well as Los Angeles courts. And so these data included things like client demographics and client history in the criminal justice system. So things like prior convictions and missed appearances in previous cases. And then we also collected a lot of information about the cases themselves. So things like the number of charges in each case, the nature of those charges, how long cases lasted, and other case level information like that. And then the final piece of information that we really wanted to gather was just information on the spread of COVID-19 throughout Los Angeles in that first part of 2020, because the pandemic itself, right, could really impact case outcomes. And so we were able to pull in data that came from California's Health and Human Services Department. And so we were looking at positivity rate and the number of active COVID cases during a criminal case. As a way to sort of account for those pandemic related effects. So as far as outcomes of our analysis or results, there were three main results corresponding to those three outcomes. So the first result of our analysis was that clients released on their own recognizance as part of that emergency policy were no more likely to miss a court appearance than pre-policy clients who had similar cases but posted bail to be released. So there's really no difference in FTA rates between the pre-policy cases where bail was posted and the post-policy cases where clients were released. We also found that clients released in that post-policy period were no more likely to have new charges filed during their case than pre-policy clients who posted bail. And then the final result that we had was that we were looking at differences in conviction rates for pre-policy clients who were held in custody throughout their case and post-policy clients that were released. And there was a small effect on the likelihood of conviction. So for felony cases, clients released on their own recognizance were less likely to be convicted than clients who were held pretrial on bail, which is kind of what our expectations were. But that relationship flipped for misdemeanor cases. So there, clients released OR were more likely to be convicted. But the final thing I'll note there is that those effect sizes were kind of small, something like 2 to 4 percentage points for each. So there wasn't a substantial effect on the likelihood of conviction. So that's kind of a high-level summary of the quantitative results. There are other results too, so if you have any questions, we can get to that in a little bit.
So that was a lot of information at one time, which is really helpful. But you mentioned, I'm going to back you up a little bit to the data collected. You mentioned that we collected data from the LACPD office, also the courts, and also public health data. Is there a reason that we needed both the public defender data and the court data in order to answer some of these questions?
Yeah, so one of the things that we were finding was so the bail information that came in the data was very important to us because that was what allowed us to sort of separate cases into people who were released without having to post bail and people that had monetary bail set. And so we were seeing some things that were unusual in the bail data that we were getting from the public defender's office. A lot more $0 bail amounts than I think we expected. And then sometimes some of the fields seem to contradict each other in some ways. So for example, custody status for a client might have said that they were in custody, but then the bail amount was 0. And so what we wanted to do is collect data from courts to see if the data there seemed to be a little bit more reliable than what we got from the public defender's office. And so we really triangulated the information that we had. There were instances where we felt the public defender's office data was more reliable as well. And so we tried to pull in all that information, collect the valuable bits, and sort of take the totality of everything that was that was reliable to put into the analysis.
Yes, we'll come back to some of those challenges, and Natasha, I'm going to ask. That's a great question, Lisa, and I think we can pull in that question now, Mason, if you're comfortable. More reliable. Can you explain how?
Yeah, so it just sort of matched our expectations for what we might see. So I think it was something like 95% of pre-policy cases had $0 bail amounts is what we were seeing, which seemed like a lot. And then when we were looking at the nature of those cases, they were for pretty serious crimes. And so it just didn't line up with our expectations, I think. When we cross-referenced that with the court data, it seemed to line up more with what we expected. We had a lot of conversations also with the Los Angeles Public Defender's Office to try and get a better understanding of what why we were seeing the things that we were seeing in the data, and that cleared up a lot as well. So it would be wonderful if there was a ground truth and we really knew what that was, but in a county the size of Los Angeles, there's a lot of inconsistencies sometimes in the way the data is entered into the system, and so there was one of the challenges we had is finding that ground truth. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, and I like that you clarified reliable and not liable. We're in a room full of attorneys, so it's probably important to do so. So thank you for that. So Natasha, Mason talked a little bit about some of the challenges in getting that data, and I'm going to throw a wild card question here at you, having not prepped you for it. But one of the things that we needed to do was try to identify who was also being released, right? We had an early question about the impact of those being released early from their sentences, and we weren't able to collect a lot of information about that. You want to, if you feel comfortable, share a little bit about how the office had to quickly navigate data collection about who was being released and how to advocate for clients that met any sort of criterion.
Yes, I love odd questions coming at me. No prep. But we have been together here since March 2020. And so Mason and Sema, and there's 2 other researchers that were key, that were helping on the team. And on our end, our Chief Information Officer, Mohammed El-Rawi, also had a team. And so what they did was they collaborated very well together. And then as soon as we discovered that we had shortcomings, then we would immediately tackle how we can do them. So the first part I wanted to address was Mason's, to come off what he just said, is it was just calling the court clerks, really finding a court clerk that could really explain to us how data was inputted. And luckily their team did find somebody that was cooperative and very helpful. And as you said, Los Angeles is the largest county in the United States, and our court system is the largest. And so we span, hundreds of miles, and the courtrooms, we have hundreds of them. So just in one courthouse, like in Inglewood, you could have 10 courtrooms. And so that's 10 different clerks inputting, and you would hope that everyone is trained in the same way. But with time and experience, people don't enter data in the same method. And so that was one huge hurdle. But once we identified the main ways in which the clerks were supposed to be entering, that helped us break down perhaps what was missing, and then how we can fill in the blanks to what was missing. Then, I'm so sorry, we now have a gardener outside that you can probably hear him in the background. No? Okay, good. And can you repeat your question? I just got distracted. I apologize.
Just how the office was also trying to manage the data that you had to collect to be able to advocate for clients at the same time while we were looking for the information to be able to do the analysis around who was being released and who was being released during their case and who was being released post their sentence, and not being able to answer that question.
Mason, how do you recall that we tackled that issue?
So we had lots of conversations. By the way, Sema, you cut out for a second in what you were saying, so I don't know if that was just for me or for everybody. But I think the question is, how did we get an understanding of the data? This is actually something we're going to talk about in a little bit, maybe, but we can jump ahead. But just to figure out what the data represented, we had to have lots of conversations. So on the LACPD side, Gracia was indispensable. Joanna was indispensable. When we were able to connect with representatives from courts, they were very helpful. Nick Stewart Houghton. So I have all these names in my head, and a few of them I've met, but just getting a better handle on what the data elements in our data represented and what the specific values in those data elements meant. And there's no easy way of doing that. It's not like the information is just there attached to the data. You have to talk to the people that know the data and are entering the data to really get a handle on that. And so it was gradual, I think, but we just got to a point where we were able to make good decisions based on what we knew and what we didn't know, and really leverage the data in a way that that allowed us to do the analysis in a meaningful way. So.
So I think where it's also helpful to drill in a little bit. Can you all hear me now? I'm wondering if my internet is being.
Yes.
Okay. So in part of this partnership, we also talked with clients and attorneys to try to contextualize some of the things we probably couldn't see in the data itself. So we may not have been recording when people were showing up in court without their client because they had signed 977s during this time because it became a little more lenient, right? And so being able to capture some of that and understand the experience that people had required some interviews and some conversations to take place. Natasha, I wondered if you could dig in a little bit on the types of experiences or other aspects of those clients' experiences in court or in case processing that you wish you were capturing more of, particularly as we're thinking about like the 977s and the motions and things that we couldn't see in the data in particular.
Right. I don't think we were, prior to COVID, we as an office discouraged 977A appearances. But then a court rule changed and we were encouraging it, obviously. And we wanted to have less clients and less family at the courthouses. And so that is one thing that we did not keep track of. It would have been really difficult to do on any one day in misdemeanors. Like a person could be handling, assisting 20 clients. And in that, 19 out of the 20 could have been 977. And so in the misdemeanor world, that was very robust. And then in felonies, we were also doing that. And then prior to COVID-19, we were not actively encouraging attorneys to do that. But that is something that hopefully a pandemic will not happen again, but in a different situation where we have to turn to leveraging 977, that we will keep track of that data. Another, I think, data point that we did not capture was how many appearances did somebody have to resolve a case. So sometimes, the courts were just flat out, come back in 3 months. They were trying to extend court appearances as long as possible. But for some people, that just continued to happen. And that's something that we also, I don't think, captured.
Mason, can you talk a little bit about how some of that contextual information that would have been helpful to understand a client's experience impacted any of the questions that we were asking and what we would have liked to control for?
Yeah, so the 977s, of course, would have been something that would have been great to control for. We knew that they were happening more often in that post-policy period. And so that might have been part of the reason why we were seeing return to court rates that were the same, but that's something that we couldn't really account for. There were other contextual pieces of information that we would have liked to have had in the data. One would have been socioeconomic status, which is just something that's not collected, but for the purposes of our analysis, that would have been really informative, I think, and would have impacted some of the outcomes that we were looking at. Like missed appearances, for example. And so, gosh, what else was there? I know the Bail Project was an organization that was around at a time during that time, and it was assisting clients, giving them reminders about court appearances, and helping them find transportation to their court appearances. But we weren't sure which clients had that assistance from the Bail Project in that way. Court reminders or video appearances, knowing which clients were able to appear via video conference would have been helpful. For all of these things are, related to those outcomes that we're interested in, whether or not someone was able to make their appearance. That's a sampling of some of the contextual information that would have been valuable to have. I'm not sure, so your other question was how that would have affected the questions or like the kind of things we were looking at?
Yeah, I think you covered it in how it might have impacted our analyses and what we could have controlled for. I think in this partnership and also trying to recognize that we were working with the data we had, and we were also talking with clients and with attorneys, that qualitative component really helped contextualize it and give us some better understanding of where the office might go and better kind of communicating or tracking that information. And also whether or not it was important to the office, we were able to have conversations about that. So to Natasha's point, we may collect some of those items and some of them may just have to be something that's collected contextually. So it's helpful.
May I answer a question that popped up in the chat? And what is a 977? So that's after Penal Code 977A is when an attorney and the client make an agreement that the attorney will appear on their behalf in court. And traditionally, it's only for certain crimes and for misdemeanors. So it could include arraignment all the way up to sentencing. And you could even do a trial without the client by your side if the court allows it. A 977 does allow that. But for certain charges, the court will not accept a 977 and will ask that the client be present at all of the court hearings. And so during this period, the attorneys really, some cases, the client never even met the attorney. They completely handled it without the client ever coming to court. And that was all via phone, email, and really following up with the client to, let's say if it was a simple misdemeanor of possession of, methamphetamine or something like that, then they would have had to take, let's say, 20 NA classes and then provide proof of completion. All of that was done via email, and then the attorney would submit that on behalf of the client. And then if the agreement was that the case was dismissed, then the attorney actually never would have met the person in person. And we ran across that when we were interviewing clients, not me personally, but Sema's crew team. And some just said we never even met them, but they were really complimentary of the attorneys following up with them every single time after a court appearance. Okay, your next date is such and such, and I will email you kind of what the summary of what happened. And part of 977 is if we lose contact with the client, then we have to make that representation to the court. And we always ask for a continuance to, let's make another effort to get back into contact with them. And during COVID, the system really worked out very, very well. And the courts were very supportive of everybody working well together and to use WebEx and to avoid any instances of people coming to court unnecessarily. In LA, we had one of our coworkers died from COVID. We also had 3 court reporters, massive amounts of clients in custody. So it was really taken very, very seriously here, as everywhere, but it was just everybody did work very well together.
And one thing that came up in those interviews you mentioned, Natasha, was that the clients were really quite happy with kind of their experience with their defense attorney, right? And being able to track what was happening in their case, despite everything else feeling very chaotic. But also with the attorneys learning that they were also all handling 977 slightly differently, right? And so one of the recommendations that came out of this work too was to provide some more top-down guidance around policies like that so that there's consistency and the experience of clients is managed a bit more in that way. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what you were taking away from the findings themselves and how the office intends to use those moving forward, as well as some of those recommendations, and I'll post them in the chat too for everybody, of taking that information that we garnered both from the quantitative findings, the lack of connection between monetary bail and some of these outcomes, and from the qualitative findings of we really need more context and more understanding of what people are going through. So wondering if you can speak a little bit to what the next step is for the office in using both of those pieces of information, both the quantitative findings and the recommendations. that were made.
Well, we are talking about not implementing, but using that data within motions. So to educate the bench that setting bail isn't the deciding factor on whether somebody appears in court or not, and to really uplift what the other, what the Bail Project and other legislators. I mean, there's so much movement around getting the word out and having judges and prosecutors realize that bail isn't the answer. And that's for most people, right? And in most cases, it's an impediment, and it's not justice. It's keeping people behind bars when really they could be contributing in society by working, providing for their families, being with their families, addressing their problems, whether they're health related, physically or mentally, or whether, so being behind bars isn't serving any purpose for us. And so it's to try to educate the bench, and the bench, a lot of times they're elected officials or they're appointed, and so they want to maintain their seat. And so they oftentimes, despite the evidence, they will just set bail anyway and keep somebody in custody, despite the fact that we have evidence that they are going to return, whether they have it or not. So it's really a culture change, and that's kind of the biggest impediment. And because Los Angeles is so large, and it's just by judge, courthouse by courthouse, is to try to get the data out. And that's the discussions that we're having now, is to put it into the motions. And so then that way it can be on the record, and then it can be discussed openly as well. And it's new for, I think, the courts to talk about data in a larger context with researchers. That's not something that's not normal for them. They want to look at case precedent and talk about the legal aspects of the case, but when you have to look at the big picture, and so that's what we're trying to do. Now, qualitatively with clients, that's always, that's what we're trying to protect, and who are we trying to protect, and there's so much talk, I mean, in lots of different ways. So how to incorporate even clients' participatory defense, highlighting their stories. So educating newer attorneys that that's really what you need to do. That's how you create impact in the courtroom, is to talk about the clients and to share their experiences and to garner emotion that way. But there's a lot of things I think that as an office, can be better with incorporating our clients' experiences, and also, really acknowledging how much impediment it is for people to get to the courthouses, whether it's, lack of transportation. So we're really, as an office, trying to identify ways in which we can better that. So we received a grant, for instance, from Uber. And so it's not much, but we have received 3 from them so far. So $10,000 here 1 year, another $10,000 another year. It's amazing. And that money is utilized with the Partners for Justice. And so they will help coordinate Uber rides for the clients that are working with those advocates. And that's just one small example of like how we can better communicate with the clients, identify what their needs are, and then make sure that they get to, let's say, their domestic violence class or their drug education class, just something to ensure that they won't miss a court date and won't have a hindrance to completing programs. Because that's a lot of what happens, is that people either don't have means to get to the program, then that's a potential violation, and then that's maybe why they will not come to court. So it's to try to uplift them and to stop those barriers.
That's great. And it speaks to that last recommendation too, around investing in resources, which means also investing your time in finding resources that can help when you don't have financial resources to invest, right? And so Partners for Justice being one of those areas that can help kind of address, hey, we heard that clients are having a lot of transportation issues in and out of COVID. How do we address that, and finding additional partners that can help you do that when you can't necessarily pay for more and more transportation as an office specifically. One of the recommendations that same recommendation about investing in resources also had to do with technology. So over the course of the partnership, your office also changed CMS systems. ZLS also came up in the last conversation. So LA County Public Defender has Mohammed that Natasha mentioned. Mohammed is their Chief Technology Officer, Chief Information Officer.
CIO.
And so they have a lot of expertise in kind of building those systems. And so over the course of learning about their data and pushing forward, they've made a lot of changes to that. Part of that technology is also around client communication, et cetera. Can you talk a little bit about the hurdle to getting that technology underway?
Sure. That was probably 20 years in the making. And Mohammed really got it through the finish line. So it's a CCMS, it's a client case management system, and it's absolutely incredible. It's trying to eliminate paper. So that is a big thing. So that way attorneys and social workers, paralegals, investigators can just have their computer and laptop and access their case wherever they need to go. And so it imports all the information from the courts. And then also we are able to then add case notes, any more identifying information about witnesses. Just there's so many different data points, and that launched October of 2020. And so that was right, after we started discussions with Measures for Justice. And so that was a big assistance in getting all of the data synthesized and to Mason's team to analyze. We now have, which Mohammed texted me, and I think that he might have also told you about at a prior occasion, but our office just implemented a data lake, and it takes court and public defender data and correlates it effectively to create a gold layer of data to provide answers to complex questions easily and quickly. The data lake is a data reporting enterprise system that is used by Fortune 500 companies to drive decisions. We may be the first indigent defense office that has an actual data lake implemented. Quote from Mohammed.
Yes, he's very proud of that gold layer, which is really incredible. And I think a really good transition into opening this up for additional questions from everyone participating today. So we've shared a little bit about the results of the analysis. So we have two kind of different components here that we're happy to talk through. It's what are the results of understanding the impact of $0 bail, so the study itself, and also what has come out of the benefit of data for attorneys as they're going into court with motions, but also in better understanding the processes that the office is undertaking and the policies that they implement. So we want to open up for conversation and questions from all of you. I can pose some to all of you, but if you have any now about what Mason and Natasha have shared, please raise your hand and then we'll have you unmute and share a few. Warren?
Yeah, oh, my camera's blocked. So I just wanted to ask about essentially what I think that the second item you said. So like having this data, like have you seen like pretty large scale change on how bail is viewed, or no? Has that not been convincing? I guess or the real answer, which is probably it depends on which courtroom. But I'd love to hear you guys speak on that.
Well, in a larger political context of Los Angeles, we have George Gascon as our current district attorney. And since he was elected, he's coming up for re-election in November. But for the past 4 years with COVID, there is wrongly a misperception that crime has gone up because so this has skewed the conversation and has really impacted it in Los Angeles. I mean, I live in a neighborhood that people are verbally are talking about it in the streets, social media, on their platforms. It is a huge discussion about bail, and they want to keep it. They want to see more people behind bars. They are very upset with George Gascon's policies. Obviously not me and the other 24% of people that voted for him in the primaries, but it is a very large on the street daily conversation that I hear at restaurants. And so while the county of Los Angeles has invested quite a substantial amount of energy and time and resources to having a zero bail policy. And when that hit the LA Times, that just caused chaos across the county. And so it's trying to educate lay people, lack of a better word, but people not in the criminal justice system itself, that bail is actually not working, and it's not keeping our communities safe. And it's trying to talk to them from a public safety standard that everybody wants to have their communities safe, but we also want to ensure that people that are charged with crimes, they're innocent until proven otherwise, and we don't want to have them in custody pre-trial. That's, I think, makes up like over 60 to 70% of people that are in custody here in Los Angeles County are all pre-trial. And so and then just to educate my neighbors and everyone in Los Angeles that, everyone that goes into custody is going to one day be released for the most part, And so it's a really big discussion here, and we're going to see what happens in November, but everybody is coming out from all different, social justice advocates, and there's so many organizations here in Los Angeles that are really trying to educate people that bail is just not working. Did that answer your question, I hope?
Yeah, I think so.
And we have another question coming in about using data to justify bail determination. Have you had to deal with requests to see your raw data? And generally, what are your thoughts about protecting information of this type as it gets used in courts? Any concerns your staff or data will be subpoenaed?
We have not had a request for raw data, and I'll have to take that question back. I don't know whether someone has confronted that issue in court. I can definitely inquire.
$0 bail. Can you describe $0 bail versus ROR? We were treating it similarly, having not, if you did not have to pay to be released. But the $0 bail policy was specific to 2020. It was implemented so that they could keep people out of custody when COVID was kind of rampant across. But Natasha, Mason, feel free to correct anything I just said.
No.
Wonder, Mason, one thing that we noticed in some of the policies, and you mentioned, Nick, the conversation around how $0 bail was being implemented and the challenges that posed in seeing it in the data was that it started off and judges saw it as a requirement and then saw it as a recommendation. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, so many laws, there's some element of discretion as far as how the $0 bail policy is actually implemented in courts. And so I think the language is something like, I don't know the exact language, but something around the lines of a judge has the right to make the determination whether or not a case is serious enough to hold somebody. And so I think at the beginning, when you looked at maybe the first couple of weeks after March 26th, you saw a definite change in the use of bail in courts. And then over the course of the next couple of months after that, it seemed like more and more judges were were going ahead and using monetary bail anyway, which for our purposes in terms of the analysis was a little frustrating, right? We would have liked to have seen a policy that was implemented and then a real difference between that pre and post policy period that would allow us to sort of leverage the data and get the answers that we wanted. And it wasn't quite like that as we would have hoped. So yeah, that was a bit of a challenge.
Tasha, do you want to
Yes, of
share?
course. So the Ballmer Foundation or the Ballmer Group paid for, I believe, 80% of the funds or the grant for Measures for Justice. And then there was another 10%. Oh my gosh.
I think they may be
The Rosenthal.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Rosenthal Foundation. And then the other 10% was from the Sergey Brin Foundation. And hopefully I pronounced their name correctly.
So private foundation funding to get this off the ground, and kind of through the county's board of supervisors too, to kind of have that process approved.
Yes, but that was all MFJ's doing. They have a team that works on grant fundraising for projects, and they were able to start the conversation with the Ballmer Group. And they're heavily invested in social justice reform in Los Angeles County. If you don't know Steve Ballmer, he's also the owner of the LA Clippers, and his background was with Google. And so they are heavily invested in many, many different social justice projects in Los Angeles, with the alternatives to incarceration and I believe the Office of Diversion and Reentry. Don't quote me on the last part, but they're very generous and active and involved.
So I want to open it up also for all of you to share a little bit around your own experiences in trying to measure bail and the challenges you've had in some of the data collection and the questions that you're able to ask and answer using your own. Does anyone participating today have experience doing that, want to share? Do our challenges or findings resonate with all of you? Cannot see any of your faces, which is absolutely fine, but speaking myself. Were there other
hands raised? Maybe do you want to share the data? Or, when we met in Chicago, there were 2 presentations, and it was maybe you or Mason can talk about it, about how similar it was across the jurisdictions.
Yeah, so at the Academy of Criminal Justice Sciences conference in Chicago 2 months ago, we were on a similar panel with, I think it was Houston, somewhere in Ohio.
That's what I was going to say, somewhere in Ohio, but I don't.
And Los Angeles, and we were very interested to see that similar findings around the differences between people who had to pay for release and people who did not, that there's no significant difference there. And so to what Natasha was sharing before about really trying to educate that it's not that, people who are released are just that no one commits any offenses, or they're always going to make it to court, or there's nothing, like nothing will ever go wrong, right? But to really educate to say that it's not bail that makes that difference, right? And so you are arbitrarily kind of hurting people here for not a lot of benefit, at least according to the data. And so it was interesting to see that across all of these cities, it was consistent, right? It was interesting and promising to see that. And so I think the more that groups like this one can kind of pursue sharing that research and sharing it across, so that even from Los Angeles to a smaller city to Houston, right, different regions of the country are experiencing something very similar, the better. Torin.
Yeah, so on that note, I had wanted to mention this paper, but I wanted to wait until it was actually somewhat relevant. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it. I can take no credit for it. It's out of uh, University of Pennsylvania. They did a study of the paper is just called "Systematic Failure to Appear in Court." I'll paste. They have a free version, so I'll paste it in the chat. I found this paper really interesting because not only did they, come to similar conclusions in terms of um, uh, failure to appear policies, but they really reframed it in terms of like, yes, someone who's out on bail could fail to appear, but guess what? Someone who's in jail can fail to appear, and actually often do. And actually, in this one particular, Philadelphia study, it was pretty similar, the rates of failure to appear in jail versus out of jail, because there's miscommunications, there's staffing issues. And so that's one side. And then the other side is, guess what? Other people can fail to appear, right? Like, just because the defendant's there doesn't mean court's going to happen. And so they went through, police officers, witnesses, victims, and found that by far the most common reason that a hearing doesn't happen is everyone else, not the defendant. So I was wondering, one, if you guys had seen this and had anything to say about it, but also, like, do you have that kind of data available? I know I certainly don't in any of the jurisdictions that I'm at, but if you looked at that or thought about that at all.
Yeah, we did not include that in our analysis. Mason, correct me if I'm wrong, and who failed to appear other than the client. But it's difficult to capture, right? We don't often have in data sets, and Natasha, if you know of this, and I'm speaking out of turn here for LA, let me know, but that in the data sets that we see, it's not often that we know if a continuance even happens, and if it happens, who requested it, and if we know who requested it, we don't know, for what reason. And so all of that is really critical to being able to make that argument, right? It's not always the defendant that's not there, and it is not, that is a burden that we're placing on them, but not on anyone else to also make sure that they're there. So yeah, absolutely, Torrin, I think it's a great question. We did not have that in our data at the time.
And we're not capturing it. I mean, if a witness doesn't show up and it's critical to the prosecutor moving forward or not, and if the case is dismissed, we're not capturing the actual reason. Or if it's a continuance because of a non-appearance by somebody, we're not capturing that either. And I have not looked at that study, so I'm really excited to read that. So thank you for putting that link in the chat. And then there was a question in the chat also. Yes, we will provide our contact information.
Yes, please, and reach out. We're happy to keep talking about this. We really loved this partnership, and so the more that we can kind of help others have similar relationships and supportive partnerships like this, it would be great. Thomas S., in what form will this quantitative research be published? We are working on that. So we're having conversations with the office about where we can display that information, and if we're going to submit it for a publication. But we are currently working on getting at least the executive summary up on MFJ's website so that it can become accessible to others to take and learn from, and run other analyses that can be supportive of that and expand that conversation. So we're happy to share with IDRA when we do have something somewhere public for everybody to have. Thank you very much. Fingers crossed indeed. Other questions? I have questions for all of you, of course, as experts in and of your own work, but I'm wondering what some of the biggest challenges you've had in data collection to answer the questions you have, or to continue the conversation that Jonah started earlier around buy-in, right? Is there buy-in for this type of work and type of research in offices that you either are working in or have tried to partner with? It's not a very chatty group. Natasha, do you want to speak a little bit to other projects that you've taken on since then around research and answering questions that you have? Or Paul, if you have a question, please.
Well, I don't have the greatest of information, so I was, but I do feel like, you know, since you're not hitting a chatty group, I'll just sort of highlight this, and in case someone's interested, maybe it could be rewoken. Years ago, I realized that we in Pima County, and I no longer work for Pima County, but at the time I did, that we had quite a number of people who were recommended for release by our pretrial services. Our pretrial services department is also separate from probation, which is not, some are in probation, some are not, and so it's a separate entity, which was really helpful. And they would recommend for release based upon the Arnold Foundation release assessment, but then the judges would still hold them for reasons, who knows why. And we were having a jail population issue. Pima County actually does have a jail population issue again. But during that time, I recognized that when bonds were paid or bail was paid, that it went into the general fund. And so if we just took from the general fund to release these people, it would just end up right back in, and it would cost us nothing and save us money by not having people in jail. And that if we released those who were recommended for release based on the Arnold Foundation's release assessment, it would all be scientific, evidence-based, blah, 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 blah. I have issues with the Arnold Foundation assessment, but we don't need to get into that. It was a program that was approved by the Board of Supervisors. The one thing is that the county manager was concerned about the image of Pima County bailing people out, and what if they committed another crime? Is Pima County liable? So they wanted it to be a nonprofit that would bond them out, but the county would essentially reimburse the nonprofit and pay the nonprofit for staff to do the bond program. There was no other requirements in the program other than having to have some financial, stuff ahead of time, because they were only going to reimburse, which I think was a problem. And I think that someone could have responded saying, we needed to get money ahead of time, and that probably would have ended up working. But ultimately, no nonprofit. Well, actually, one nonprofit replied, but that nonprofit was deemed to have a conflict of interest, which I disagree with, but they did. Anyway, all that to be said is that program technically was still approved by the board today, but has never been initiated. It's really unfortunate. I think it would have been an incredible program. It was recently brought to light again because of this jail population issue, but unfortunately the county manager doesn't really want the program in place because they're concerned, because the news has already talked about some people who got released by the courts without a bail, without a bond, and committed crimes. So the county manager really doesn't want it to happen, but it could happen if somebody pushed it. I could certainly help get them in touch with the right things. I think it would be super interesting, and it would pay for whomever to do it. You just have to get some money ahead of time. Anyway, I'm just glad to sort of bring it up here. I'm really sad it didn't happen. I no longer work for Pima County, but I could definitely make it happen if somebody was actually interested. So I'll put my email in the chat if anybody's interested, and I'd be glad to get you set up in the right way. So that's all I was going to say.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, the bail. Oh, go ahead, Natasha.
I was going to say with the bail project with Robin Steinberg, I think, didn't the Bronx Defenders do that, where the actual court started like a fund, and then they were releasing people? I thought so the bail project is a nonprofit, but the actual courts created its own system of posting bail for people. I'll have to double check if I recall that conversation. So it's, Paul, I think it's doable, and I'd love to see that Board of Supervisor motion and any kind of documents you have. It's always a county council. Was that the first word that we started off with? This was liable. Going back to that liability.
Natasha, can I just
risk.
ask you for a sense of size? Because I grew up in LA County and I know how big it is. But just, can you tell me roughly how many clients you all represent in a year?
If you give me 1 second, I actually have that data from.
Because I can't even imagine in a county that large, any data consistency. Like I was a juror in LA County, and I now live in Travis County, which is Austin in Texas, we have one courthouse, like it's not a thing. I went to LA County, I've done jury duty, and then they sent me to, you know, traffic court in Pasadena. So it's an interesting place in terms of size.
This data is the most recent that we have collected, and it's for fiscal year 2022 to 2023. And our office, we were assigned 33,498 felonies, and that's unique case counts. Misdemeanors was close to 70,000, and juvenile was close to 3,000.
Yeah, that size is just incredible. So, and then I just know like data collection, I was thinking about, you know, how, you know, I know the court coordinators. I work with the clerks in Austin, in Travis County, and getting them to change any process. And, you know, even like though I know everyone, like even the consistency can, you know, vary and stuff. So I echo your frustration or challenges with data collection, and I think I've seen it improve. You know, I know there's a lot of initiatives within our county, and I'm sure all over, to improve our data collection. It's kind of slow, but I think as we were talking about with Jonah, you know, there's definitely incremental change that is happening. And so thank you for sharing this. It's and this partnership, you know, IDRA sort of was started as this idea of like, how do we get practitioners and researchers together? And that was sort of our whole idea with IDRA. And so having this kind of partnership come out has been really, really great to see. So thank you guys for sharing this.
Thank you. Yeah, the buy-in factor is so important. And I know Jonah talked about that a little bit, but the more we can demonstrate that data are useful, and the more that, you know, folks like Natasha and practitioners take it and run with it, the more we'll also learn as researchers. You know, the things we think are useful may not always be so. And so making sure that we're producing research that can move the ball forward, I think, is a good thing.
It also helps validate the work that you're doing. So for instance, we have in our juvenile division, we have a client assessment recommendation and evaluation project. It's been going on since 1999. So we have former trial attorneys, and they become resource attorneys, which means that they're helping the youth with their educational needs in the school districts. And then if a client is identified or we suspect they're developmentally disabled, then those attorneys refer them to the regional centers. And so back in 2016, 2017, we worked with Resource Development Associates to, they came and did a research project to evaluate. And then now we're having another one done, and we're hoping to launch that this month, and that's with the RAND Corporation. And so the more evaluations you can have a program, then you can have a evidence-based label or best practices, and then which further elevates, you know, the project, and then could possibly expand county-wide. And so while we have 12 resource attorneys throughout the county, you know, there is not for like private defense, the independent bar panel that our office also manages. And so they don't have resource attorney staff. And so this, hopefully with the more evaluations we have of a project, then that could be rolled out and supported more widely with the Board of Supervisors. And that's how you, what I've learned in the past, you know, not being a trial attorney and thinking of things in a larger picture, is that funding agencies, they want data. They're not going to give your project or your office any money if you're not going to be collecting information to share them, and for them to look back and to then measure, you know, was it successful? Was that money used in the best way that it could have been? And so I love these collaborations. And you know, one of our coworkers, we mentioned Nick Stewart-Oaten, he is now a head deputy If you want to email him to congratulate him about that. But he is huge in data, and he has written laws or helped pass laws with mental health diversion. And so he would love, and we're trying to find a research institution or a nonprofit that would help evaluate the mental health diversion throughout the state of California, not just our own in Los Angeles, so we can have a better understanding of what's happening in different jurisdictions. So we are working on that as well.
Yeah, I think one of the recommendations, like we said, was to invest time in finding partnerships that can help lift some of that financial burden too. So if you're going to implement a different bail process, or you're trying to get funders to look at something like the Uber donation, right? If Uber is going to give money to help you find resources to get people to and from court, there are a lot of organizations, particularly around cities, but also now more and more reaching into rural jurisdictions to be able to do that. And they're hungry for offices that are able to pilot things and able to participate. And so I think the more creative that can be, if researchers can help collect the data and make sure that it is sustainable long term, I think that is a good outlet for all of us to be thinking about. Also work with the LA County PD if you are interested in that diversion evaluation. I think we can only say great things. Okay.
I had one other thought, which is it sounds like your CIO is really into data collection, and I don't know if you guys do internal data dashboards or stuff like that, but IDRA is always we have a lot of data geeks in here. So if you all would like to do a presentation for IDRA, or if anything like that, we would love to hear from you. I think LA County obviously is huge, so you have a lot more stuff going on and can sort of handle a big thing, but we would love to see sort of what what you guys are doing and what can be done.
Sure, I will definitely relay that message and then connect you with him.
Great, thank you.
He absolutely loves data.
Yeah, we would love to hear from him.
Okay, so we have about 20 minutes left if anyone has more questions. I know it's also the end of the day on a Friday for some of us, so recognizing that chatting is not always the most exciting thing at I think 3 p.m. for many of you. But if there's more questions, again, either about the study itself or about the way that the office is using the data or tackling it, or questions for us around just data culture in general, we're happy to stay on and chat about it. But otherwise, Stephen, I'm going to turn it back to you wherever you have gone.
Yeah, it just takes a second to unmute and get me back on the screen. But yeah, I guess I'll go slow in case other questions come up as I'm doing our sort of like outro. But thank you so much for being here and for this really great presentation, and for everybody who's been presenting and joining us throughout the whole conference. We're always really thrilled with the turnout for these conferences and for all the different kinds of things we get to bring to our community. Meg is exactly right. We're always looking for people to do our monthly calls going forward. So we have a call once a month with IDRA where we follow up on things that came from this conference, where we see examples of, as Meg was saying, internal tools that people have created for data collection, management, analysis, dashboarding, all that sort of stuff. We're interested in all of it here at IDRA, so please be in touch if you have ideas about that. But yeah, thanks very much for being here for our conference, and we look forward to seeing many of you at our monthly calls going forward. And thanks to our presenters.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.